All right, so hoping to be able to help explain how I got to um, the values that I did and the thought process that I used to determine how much water is going to be inside my rain barrels without adding a sight glass. So you can absolutely add a hole down here, and connect a clear tube basically with a couple 90s. That'll show you where the water is in that respective tank. Didn't want more fittings, and I did not want to have any spots where sunlight would be able to create algae and have that spread throughout the tank. So how I'm going to do this is effectively with a sounding stick, which is a just a stick that I'm going to take this upper 290s off, and I'm just going to put a piece of molding down through the tank to the bottom. When you take it out, I'll see where the water line is, and that'll give me an idea of how much is actually in um, the tank. So to do this, I broke the tanks up or the barrels into separate segments. So the first segment is called this inverted truncated cone. So instead of being all the way down, coming to a full point at the bottom, it is a truncated cone. And I also had a halfway point in there, using an approximation for that. So that's going to be my first two segments. My next segment is going to be just the straight section of the barrel, which is just a volume of a cylinder, pretty straightforward. And then again, I now have a truncated cone on top as well. So again, we have radius 1, radius 2, and we'll have a known height. And then again, we have uh, a halfway point on that. So now that we have the actual um, segments that I'm looking at, going through and going into a Google sheet that I put together, where I'm basically just going to be using pretty much these two formulas for what's going on. So again, with that truncated cone, move this out of the way a little bit. Truncated cone is radius 1, radius 2, and a height. So to get the volume of that, so pi over 3 multiplied by r1 squared plus r1 times r2 plus r2 squared, multiply all that by the height. Then the volume of just a regular cylinder, pi r squared times h. So again, not that groundbreaking of math and equations. So now we'll get into what I actually did. So the straight height, and I'll put this on. So we have our straight section, which was just this middle section where we'd have a constant radius. And with that height, the height from the bottom segment, so again, from basically the bottom of the barrel to that first, where it starts to transition to the straight radius or the single radius. Then same thing for the top, how the height from basically where the cursor is to the top of where the water line is going to be. Then bottom radius, so what's my smallest radius across the bottom. Then my straight radius, and then my top radius segment. And then again, I also did the radius for the bottom halfway up, and the height at halfway, radius at the top section halfway up, and then that respective height as well. So from that, it's pretty much use these equations that are below and fill them in. So the volume of the bottom section comes out to this value in cubic inches, and converting that out to gallons and continuing along. So then getting into what I'm actually going to be putting on the piece of molding that I'm going to dip into the tank. So we've got at 0 inches, yep, there's 0 water in the tank. Can't use any of it. So then at 4.5, which is the volume at halfway up the bottom segment, I've got roughly 5 gallons in one tank. And again, I have 3 tanks. And I recognize that these aren't going to be exactly accurate, and they're not intended to be, because the water line, as this is completely full, is not going to be at the fullest height in my upper barrel, just due to the slope of my property. So again, these are rough approximations. These tell me roughly how many gallons I need to take out of the barrel before a potential storm comes in, so we don't overflow. So as we go on, if I'm at 21 inches from the bottom, that's where the water line is. I know I've got roughly 33 gallons in this tank, and I got roughly 100 gallons. It's gonna be a little bit more for all three of these gang together. Yeah, pretty straightforward, pretty simple things. If you have any questions on how I got to this, please let me know. I'll go downstairs in just a few, and I'll take a quick little video of the sounding tube device that I've created. Again, it's not as complex as it sounds. Um, it's a dipstick, it's a sounding stick, whatever you want to call it. Um, in a previous job in the naval architecture side of things, any tanks that are on a boat, you need to be able to know how much volume is in each respective tank. That way it corresponds to respective weight, and you know how to balance the vessel fore and aft and port and starboard. So knowing all that for stability, and again, I used to be in that industry for a couple of years. It's really pretty straightforward. Makes you apply a little bit of the math you learned back in school.
All right, so this is pretty much the physical side of the Google Sheet that I was sharing. So at 4.5 inches, I have either 5 gallons or 15 gallons for the whole system. At 15 inches, I've got 23 and 68, and so forth and so forth. Bad thing about writing with Sharpie is it kind of bleeds in, and when you mess up, it kind of looks bad. But yeah, 34 inches, 56 gallons, 167 gallons for the system. Tomorrow morning, I'll go ahead and actually sound the tank, and we shall see how much water is actually in the system. We've got some weather coming in this weekend, so I want to be able to gauge how much water comes in, how quickly, and how much I need to be able to actually bleed off to continue collecting. All right, so I decided that I didn't really want to wait till tomorrow. I wanted to figure this out. Still need to get some actual mosquito net to replace that, but we'll see how this goes. I'm just gonna let it sit for a couple seconds. And then that's where the water line is. So it's about an inch or so below the 9. There we go, now I can see it. So I'd say I got probably 10 gallons or so in this tank. So roughly probably 30, 32 for the whole system. So I'd say it works. Gonna let it dry back out.